We all have hopes and dreams, the fuel that navigates us through a sea of opportunities, reaching our goals, believing the impossible, inspiring us to face the unknown. But what happens when a storm arises and fear enters the picture? It makes its way into every fiber of our being, paralyzing us, preventing us from moving forward. In today's chapter, we'll see how an invitation to let Jesus in not only vanishes our fear, but takes us to our destination.
As we are diving into this week, and this week is week 7, and this is the subtitle for Meet Me Here, is When You're Afraid. And we all deal with fear. I mean, it's a human thing, and it's a human thing on purpose. Because God made us so that we would survive. And fears are something that cause a reaction in us. And the heart of it was that if a bear was coming after you, you would be afraid and you would run. Like there are some instinctual fears that we have so that we would survive. And there are outside fears. But you and I know that there are also inside fears. And what happens is sometimes those inside fears become so real that they overtake the outside fears. Or you can be crippled by fear. And tonight we are going to look at a story where Jesus specifically uses the words, "Don't be afraid." And so we're going to dive into that and see what he's talking about, where he is, what it looks like. And we are talking about a storm. So there's going to be a storm inside the story. And an outside fear of mine can be being caught in one of our summer storms on the water. And that actually happened 2 summers ago. I decided finally to go fishing with my husband, just the two of us. He's like, every week, and it was when we were living on a lake. We had our own dock. And he was like, come fishing with me. And I was like, no. And mostly because he left at like 5 o'clock in the morning and didn't come home till like 4 o'clock. And I'm like, that is too much of my day off to be out there. So, but this time I'm like, I'll go with you. So we went out, we went to his favorite spot, and he caught like the one fish that was elusive. He was like, I caught it. I'm like, you should bring me more, except for I won't come. But that's okay. I'm your good luck. And that's great. I'm glad you caught this one fish you've been looking for. And I actually had a great time with him. I brought a book. I had my umbrella. It was kind of like being on the beach. I was on the water, except for I was in a boat, And on the way back, we started driving back towards our canal so we can get in the canal to get into our home. And the canal, we were going backwards, and there was just this ominous black cloud coming. You could see it, and we've lived here for 4 years now, and you go, this is not good. And you're like, I'm, the optimist. Thank you. Optimist came out. I'm like, I'm sure we'll make it. Because sometimes it's big and black, and nothing happens. It's great. So as we get closer and closer, and that black cloud starts to get over us, and then the wind starts to kick up. And we're in a little fishing boat. We're not in a big boat. We're in a little fishing boat. And it starts to get really kind of rough out there. I start to get seasick. I'm like, this is awesome. And so, but we really just want to get back. So we're just going full bore all the way back, because you're just like, until you have to hit that wake zone where you have to slow down. Like we're just wind whipping, and then it starts to rain. So now it's rain and wind, and I'm like, this is great. So we get in there, and we have to slow down, and it just starts raining on us. It's Florida. It's hot. It wasn't cold, which is good. We got wet. You're like, big deal. So we're coming in, and as we got closer to where we get into our canal, we started to see the lightning. right? And you're like, this is bad. This is really bad. And you saw the lightning out there, you see the lightning out there, and then we get in a little bit farther, and then we see the lightning right there. And we smell it. Smelled the lightning, and inside I start freaking out. I am like, okay, today is not the day I want to die. This is not the plan. The one time I go out with you on a boat, this is really bad. And so my husband, who is really like, he is calm. He can handle a whole lot of stress. And so he's like, we're okay. We're not okay. We need to get home. This is a bad thing. And when he says this is a bad thing, I'm like, oh, Lord, this is a bad thing. And so the funny thing is that when I get stressed, I actually get really calm and really practical. And I've noticed when it gets real for outside fears, I get really, and I do think that's also a survival instinct, because I just want to know, what do I need to do to survive? That's everything else doesn't matter. We're going to tunnel in on it. And I've noticed that when my boys, when I've had to take my boys to the hospital, and I just get like, whoosh. And so that's kind of what I did. And he was like, all right. I'm like, all right, what do we need to do? He said, we need to make it to the first bridge on, I think it's not Cape Coral Parkway, but maybe Skyline. I don't know. We need to get under that first bridge, and we need to just stay under that bridge until it passes. And so I'm like, okay, great idea. While inside I'm freaking out, outside I'm really calm, because the water is like going like this, and you're like, it feels wrong to go towards the bridge during that time, except for the lightning that we smelled. So we got underneath the bridge, and then he held on to one thing underneath it, and I held on to the other. So he was at that side, and we were just holding on and trying to keep the boat underneath this bridge, and the water's flowing, and it's wind, and it's rain, and we're just there, and we're just like, this is not where I want to die, and Lord, help us not hurt this boat, because it's not ours, all those things. And it felt like forever. And then finally, the water started to calm a little bit, the rain lightened up, I didn't smell lightning anymore, and we decided, okay, it's still raining, but it's safe enough, let's just get home. That was a big outside fear that I survived. Yay! And it's not a bad thing to survive big outside fears so that you can figure out you can survive. But it's harder when it's inside fears, I think. And the inside fears are like fear of abandonment, fear of rejection. We've talked about mind, fear of failure. What are the inside fears that we live with? Some of us have the inside fear of being afraid of what others think of us all the time. And what happens with inside fears is that they begin to take over our minds, and we start to make every decision by them. I feel like I talked about this a few weeks ago. And those inside fears are real as well. And so you've got outside fears and inside fears. And in this story, you see Jesus dealing with an outside fear in a unique way and an inside fear at the same time. And so let's get going. It is in John 6, I believe we start at, do you guys remember where we start? 16. Thank you, 16. 6:16. That sounds so nice. 6:16. When evening came, his disciples went down to the lake, where they got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. Now, what is interesting is that it starts in verse 15, where it says, Jesus, knowing they intended to come and make him a king by force, withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Can you say by himself? And actually, in the other tellings of this story in the other Gospels, it says that some of them say he sent his disciples into the boat. He sent them, like, you get in the boat and go over there. I will meet you there. So he is by himself, and his disciples went down to the lake, got into the boat, and set off across that lake to Capernaum. Now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. And so they are in the middle of this. Verse 18 says, a strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. That is how it felt out there with my husband. That especially under the bridge, because it's a tunnel, like it was a strong wind was blowing and the waters grew rough. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on water. And they were frightened, you think? That is just, that whole story makes you just want to read it again. Is this real? Like, we have read some amazing things happening. But this one, you go, he was walking on waters, ladies. And here he is, and he sends them out knowing that there was going to be a storm coming up. Now, this was actually the second storm that they had experienced with Jesus. The first time he told the storm, peace be still. This one, he sent them out, and they went out trusting that no matter what happened, they were going to be okay because they were trusting Jesus. Or at least they felt that way as they went off. How many of you have obeyed God and done something that you thought he had asked you to do, and then you got halfway through it, and you thought, he's nowhere to be found, and I'm not sure I can survive this? That's exactly how his disciples were feeling because they were in the middle of a storm. Do you know that sometimes Jesus sends you into a storm? And I think that it's important to understand that because we often, especially in the Western world that we grow up in, believe that Jesus saves us from the storm so we don't have to experience any storms ever. And here we have proof that Jesus sends people into a storm. He sends them right in. He's not worried about it. He's not like, okay, do you have your life jackets? Make sure you put them on and tie them tight, and I'll see you on the other side. No, he's like, just go. It may be rough, but you're going to make it. I'm not worried about you. You're going to make it through this storm. This storm isn't going to be the end of your story. And so he sent them into the storm. Their strong wind was blowing, and they're actually, another version says that they were going against the wind. So they were going into the wind, and they had been rowing for 3 or 4 hours, for 3 or 4 miles. And when they saw Jesus approaching the boat, and they were exhausted at this point. How frustrating is it? Not just to be in a storm that Jesus told you to go out in, but to feel like you're not getting anywhere. Isn't that the most discouraging things about storms in our lives? When we do circumstantial storms or emotional storms or relational storms, that you feel like, I just keep doing this and doing this and doing this, and nothing is changing, and I'm getting nowhere, and I'm really frustrated, and I'm really tired. And these were professional fishermen. Like, they'd been in storms before, but they were tired. And they were tired of going against the wind, and they were getting nowhere. They were just slowly crawling across the lake. And then they see Jesus. John's account says that he was approaching the boat. Another account says that as he was ready to pass them by, which I think is such an interesting detail. Because he was like, you guys are going to be fine. I'm just going to walk on the water all the way till I get to the other side. Like, he's got no worries. And he's like, I'll just see you there. And then that's in the other version. In the other gospel, Peter, this is the same experience where Peter goes, Lord, is it you? And he says, yes. And Peter, you got to love him, is like, could I join you out there? If it's you, tell me to come out. And sometimes I think Peter was like, did I just say that? That seems really unwise. I can't even see, like the water's not even like still where I could pretend it was a floor. It's like a storm, strong wind, where you're barely holding on. And then Jesus says, if it's you, tell me to join you. And he says, it's me, come on out. And Peter does. And then he walks on water as long as he keeps his eyes on Jesus. And then the second he gets overwhelmed by the winds and the waves, he sinks. But that's not the best part. The best part is that as soon as he does sink, Jesus is right there with him and then helps him back into the boat. In this version, in this account, John says that he was approaching the boat, walking on water, and they were frightened. They were terrified. They were exhausted. They were freaking out. There's another, one of the other accounts says that they thought it was a ghost. They thought they saw with their own eyes a ghost, and then the ghost spoke to them. And then the ghost had the voice of Jesus. What is happening? They've seen all these great miracles. They just fed 15,000 people. And you know that's a supernatural thing. Sometimes in your relationship with God, in my relationship with God, I know that God just did a supernatural thing. And yet when he does another thing, I'm shocked. Like, I can't wrap my brain about how we survived that, or how did God provide that need, or how did we get in Florida? And we see God do one more thing. And so we knew it was supernatural that he took the 5 barley breads and the 2 fish to feed 15,000 people. But now he's walking on water. And there's a part of me that feels, you could feel the turn in how Jesus' journey, how he was walking his journey. He didn't want to become king. He wasn't ready for that. But I also feel like he was just done. I'm done with this. Like, I'll just meet you on the other side, and I'm going to just walk on the water to get there. Like, he was just standing there at the edge of the water and went, nope, I'm done. We're just going to get there. And so he does this thing where he walks on water. Has anybody here tried to walk on water? It doesn't take long for you to figure out. It's not possible. I was at the beach this weekend, and just because I knew I was preaching this, and the water was warming up, yay, for the wimp that I am, because I don't like being in cold water. And I walked out to the shore, and it was early, and the sunrise was up, so I was like, I don't know, I don't really want to feel cold water. So I put my foot in, and then just for a second, you're like, not even a little bit of resistance is water. It's impossible to walk on water. And yet Jesus didn't bat an eye. He didn't even hesitate. I just imagine that he got to the edge and he just kept on walking as I'm going to walk through the storm. He didn't stop the storm either. He walked through the storm. And as he was approaching, they saw him. They were freaking out because he was doing something so supernatural their brains couldn't hardly wrap around it. He had told them, I am. How many times have we heard, I am? And he's using that same designation that God used with Moses at the burning bush. I am. Who should I tell them sent me? He says, I am who I am. That's who I am. And Jesus has said that 3 or 4 times in our study already. I am. I am the Logos. And now he's walking on water. What do you do when you're afraid? What do you do when you're afraid? The first thing and your first feeling is that realize that Jesus can do the impossible. He can do the impossible. He can walk on water? What else can he do? We don't know. But if he can do that, he can do anything. In fact, the end of this story, he does more than just walk on water. He defeats death. He rises from the dead. He dies for 3 days. And then the breath of God fills his lungs, and he is risen, walks out of the tomb, and then says, I'm the firstborn, so that you know that all of you will follow me. Yes, you may die, but I am the resurrection and the life. If he can walk on water, come on. He can do the impossible, but we forget. We get overwhelmed in our lives, in our work, with our fears. And when we get afraid, we get overwhelmed because something is out of our control. Like, isn't that when we really get afraid? When there's nothing for me to do. What do I need to do to survive? And then you realize you're facing something that you have no control over. You can't control a storm. And Jesus says, I'm not going to try to control this one. I'm just going to walk through it. But since you're freaking out, I'll speak to you in it. Jesus can do the impossible, and we need to remind ourselves who he is when you're afraid. That you need to remind yourself, and there's a song that I've been listening to that my son introduced me to, and I just want to read the words to you. because it's a song that has been going over in my head all week long. It's Remember by Brian and Katie Torwalt. And this is the first verse. How quickly we forget the God who lives in every day. How easy to lose sight that you reside in the mundane. How quickly we forget the power that's running through our veins, the kind of power that empties graves. Oh, my soul, remember who you're talking to, the only one who death bows to. That's the God who walks with you. Oh, my soul, you know that if he did it then, he can do it all again. His power can still raise the dead. Don't tell me he's not finished yet. Don't tell me that he's finished yet. I love the bridge on it. It says, if you broke through the oceans, you can break through these chains. If your word made the mountains, you can move them all the same. If death fell before you and it's still on its face, then the power that raised you is about to move again. Oh, my soul, remember who you're talking to. When you're afraid, realize Jesus can do the impossible. And if he defeated death, you can trust him that he can do more than you could ask or even imagine. He can do the impossible. And so in verse 20, he says, but he said to them, it is I, don't be afraid. It is I, don't be afraid. That word, it is I, it is in the Greek, it is, I know I wrote it down here. There it is. Ego am I. And I'm not saying it right. But in other places, it is actually translated, I am. But in this story, it is translated, it is me. It is I. Instead of I am, but it's the same. He's saying the same statement as he said over and over again, except for he's saying, it is I. Don't be afraid. And that word afraid is the word, it is the word phobio, where we get our word phobia. Don't be afraid. It is I. I am here. And it is in the present tense. He's like, I'm here right now on the water, in the storm. You don't have to be afraid because I'm here with you. Your second fill-in is realize that Jesus is talking to you in the storm. He's out there doing something impossible, and you're terrified, and you're freaking out because you don't know what's going on, and you're in a place that you can't control, and he speaks to them. He said, it is I. I am here with you in the middle of the strong wind and the rough waters. I'm right in the middle of the storm with you. Don't worry. Don't be afraid. It'll be all right. He's comforting them. And you know, I think that the only reason they were actually comforted is because they recognized his voice. Because if it was a stranger's voice, they would have turned around or kept going. Like, never mind. If it really was a ghost, keep rowing. We don't know who that is, but they recognized his voice right away. That's all he had to say was, it is I, don't be afraid. That is why it's so important in our lives, ladies, that we read the word, that you begin to recognize Jesus' voice in your life, that when you listen to worship music, that when you're journaling, when God tells you something that you know you're not smart enough to figure out, and you know it's God, write it down and then go back to it because that's his voice. And Jesus' voice will never contradict or be different than his Father's voice because they're one. There's one God. They are in complete unity. And it's so learning Jesus' voice when you're out of crisis helps you recognize Jesus' voice when you're in it. So get to know his voice when you're not in the storm. Walk with him every day so that when you are, you can recognize him and you can know it is Jesus. It is Jesus. Woo! Good thing it is Jesus. Come on in. Why don't you come? And I love this next part because it says, then they were willing to take him into the boat because until then they were not willing. We don't know what you are, but you can stay out there in the storm. But once they realized it was Jesus, they were willing to take him into the boat. Your third fill-in today is when you are afraid, when you're dealing with fear, whether it's outside or inside fear, to invite Jesus into your boat. Invite him in. Be willing to take him in wherever you are, whether it's a storm, whether it's your situation where you're frustrated and you're getting tired and you feel like it's impossible. Invite him into your boat. Come into my boat. This is where I am. This is what's taking me from here to here. I need you in my boat, Jesus. Invite him into your heart. Invite him into the very parts of your heart that fear really wreaks havoc. Invite him all the way in and let the storm rage around and invite him in and hear him say, I'm present with you right now in the middle of this mess. I am right here. And then we read about the second miracle that happens in this story. It is the second half of verse 21. Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. Does anybody else think that's weird? They were rowing for 3 or 4 hours. And then as soon as Jesus got in the boat, they're at the shore. And I bet they were relieved. They were like, thank God, I was too tired to make it all the way through. Immediately they were at the shore. And there is no story in the Gospels where Jesus does the exact same thing. He just doesn't. He heals people different. He deals with every unique situation in a unique way. And in this one, by the grace, I think it was the grace and mercy in his heart, that he was walking on water. He freaked his disciples out. They were tired from rowing all night. He stepped in the boat and he's like, let's just get you there. Yeah. Sometimes he does that in your life. In fact, it's oftentimes I've discovered that God will prepare you for a long time, but when it's time to change, when it's time to move, when it's time to do something, it seems like it happens like that. And you go, what? I need to make this decision now, and you can hear God's voice in your heart say, trust me, I'm here. Don't be afraid. I'll get you from here to here quick. Sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he'll walk the long road with you. Sometimes he'll get in your boat and then make it travel a lot faster, like the blink of an eye. Where are you tonight? What are you afraid of? On the outside, afraid of heights, spiders, lightning, the lightning capital of the world. Those are outside fears. We can control ourselves by not putting ourselves in that situation as much as possible. But what are you afraid of on the inside? What are your inside fears? Where is the boat that you have been rowing through a storm and you're tired of that you need to ask Jesus into? What is that thing? Do you know he can do the impossible? Do you know that he is the Son of God, the very breath of God, the same voice that spoke the waters into being, walked on them? Of course he can. But it's really good to remind yourself that the same God who walked on the waters rose from the dead. And the same God that rose from the dead can do anything. He can make the thing I think is impossible possible. And it's not the things, I think sometimes we're like, it would be great. Like I had a time last year when I lost the key to my car, and it was the only key. And I looked for a week for that key because to buy new keys was going to cost us hundreds of dollars. It was a little special key. And I was so discouraged, and I was confused, and I didn't know why it had happened. And I didn't know where it went. And I looked, and I was just heartbroken over it. And I remember getting up in the morning and just feeling the Holy Spirit say, don't be afraid. It is I. It's me. When was the last time you asked me for something impossible? It's been a long time. Because after a while, I forget he can do the impossible, and I forget to ask. And I've seen him not do the impossible in other parts of my life. So I think that maybe he can't do the impossible anymore like he used to or he did once, but he's not going to do it again because I don't know why. And that little thing, I said, okay, it's you. I hear you. I recognize your voice. Is there any way you could find that key for me? And I kind of left it there, but for me, it was a big step of faith. It felt like Peter stepping out into the water. If it's you, tell me to come out there, because I hadn't believed for something as concrete, impossible in a long time. And so I drove up. I didn't drive up. I was walking up behind here, and my car was parked over there. And I walked up behind the green room, and Bobby says, "You'll never guess what we found." And I was like, no way. And he goes, yes, I have your key. And I looked at the real key. And I looked at it like, it's like really here. I've been looking for this for a week. And I went through every part of my house to look for the other key. And here it is. It's impossible, but it's in my hand. God says, if I can do that, can I break the chains and the fear inside too? I can heal you from the fear of abandonment. If I can come back from the dead, I can set you free from your worst fear that is keeping you in chains and bondage and at home and worried and sick and anxious. And he said, if I can do this, I can save your soul. And that's what he said. Andy Stanley says this: if a man can predict his death and his resurrection. Many men have predicted their death. There's only one who predicted his death and his resurrection and then pulled it off. One in all of history. And his name is Jesus. Andy Stanley, if you can predict your death and resurrection, I just do whatever that man says. That's the God who walks with us. Oh, my soul, remember who you're talking to. The only one that death bows to. This is the God who walks with you. Ladies, you're not alone in your journey. And it is the God who comes to you in the middle of the storm and then gets in your boat and helps you get to wherever you need to go. And if he can do that, he can answer the prayer tonight of your heart. And more than that, he can save your soul so that you know that the day will come when we will pass away. But you can pass away with hope, knowing that the one who defeated death for himself has also promised to defeat death for you, that you will rise again to be with him for eternity. This is the God that we get to walk with. If you don't have a relationship like that, or you don't have a relationship with God at all, you can change that tonight, and you can use whatever words you need to use. But tonight is the night to remember he does do impossible things that we just are afraid to believe him for. Because he's Jesus, not anybody else. He's Jesus, and he loves you so much. He died for you. He rose again for you. And he says, come live a new resurrected life with me starting today. Let's pray. God, my heart is pounding with the reality that you're asking us to live in, which is to believe you for the impossible things we can see, but more than that, the impossible things that we can't see. Like knowing that you love us so much that you meet us right where we're at. Come into the middle of the storm with us, the storm of sin and the storm of fear and the storm of rejection and the storm of abandonment and the storm of all these things that feel more uncontrollable than the worst storm on the outside, because at least that one will stop. And you say, it is I. Don't be afraid. I'm going to be here right with you through all of it. Trust me. Ask me. I'm asking you to believe once more that I can do the impossible. Will you believe? If the Spirit of God is speaking to you right now, and you want to take that risk and say, I want to believe you for the thing that I've stopped believing for, I just want you to raise your hand and just whisper the words to him. I believe, and I'm asking. In Jesus' name, amen.
How great it is to have a Savior who walks right in the middle of the mess, just to come closer and meet us where we're at. What does it look like for you to invite Jesus into your boat? I don't know about you, but I am terrible at asking for help. Like absolutely, positively horrific at it. I could actually physically be drowning and potentially not ask the people around me for help. So for me, asking Jesus to come into my boat is having to reject everything in me and all of my flesh that says, just go it alone. You can do it. You'll be fine. You're independent. You're strong enough. And I have to fight all of that and remember that I have a Savior who loves me and wants to be in the boat with me. And so it's me letting him into those situations that I'm too afraid to ask for help in. Let's recap today's fill-ins. Realize that Jesus can do the impossible. In Luke 18:27, Jesus tells us that what is impossible with man is possible with God. Your second fill-in is realize that Jesus is speaking to you. This is a key reminder, especially when we find ourselves in the middle of a storm. If we can focus on him and what he says, we can find peace and direction to cast out all of our fears and reach our destination. Your third fill-in is invite Jesus into your boat. In the end, no matter how much you think you know your way, inviting Jesus in will always take you to where you need to be. As we draw nearer to the finale of our beloved Bible study, it is my prayer that your heart draws closer and closer to God's heart with the confidence that he is who he says he is and he will do what he says he'll do. You are his beloved.